I have a question for Sitsul on Food Next Door. What are your thoughts about how the model could be replicated elsewhere? What are the barriers and what's the path of least resistance, if you like? What are the things that need to be in place? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. Well, I mean, I think it took 2 years to set it kind of up, set the structure up. And of course, a multi-stakeholder co-op where you have different parties or different interest groups into the co-op will be difficult to set up, because and one of the things that Deb talks about is that each group, according to the co-op principles, have to have an active member participation. So if you're a landholder, what's your active participation? You provide land, and then in return, then you get some benefits out of the co-op, yeah? And so the same goes for the farmer, and same goes for the consumer. So they buy veggie boxes, and, you know, so that each has to have an economic participation into the co-op, which is important. But you can just imagine that demands quite a lot of negotiation or discussion. How do we make this so that everybody feels that it's kind of fair, yeah, and kind of equivalent to in the co-op? And this is always this is a challenge for any multi-stakeholder co-op, that you have parties who don't have the same interest in a way. And being, so that's, I would say that's maybe the biggest, what should I say, hurdle. You know, this co-op is quite special because it kind of has such a strong social focus to it as well. It's not in a way, it's not a kind of pure business. It has a strong focus on refugee integration into community, and therefore that's the reason why they've also been able to attract some external funding to set it up. But I think it's really interesting that that the Food Next Door co-op wants to become a business. They want to be sustainable, economically sustainable, and it's a lot about empowerment of the farmers as well. Jocelyn, who is kind of the lead of the African farmer community, they talk about, we want to grow our own vegetables and sell that, because there's a big market in Melbourne for African produce. There's a big market there. So let us, once we get established and can grow here, let us go with it, you know? So so it's the hurdles are the multi-stakeholder model and developing agreements so that everybody feels that they are have both advantages and also responsibilities that are felt like equal. The other model is and that's maybe more the, what should I say, the challenge, but also the pleasure, is to empower people to then try to develop this into a more sustainable, economically sustainable model. Yeah. I just wanted to mention also that multi-stakeholder model co-ops kind of originated in Italy. And they were as social cooperatives to deliver social benefits, like they would have aged care facilities and the different stakeholders would be the local council, the local church, a worker co-op maybe to provide. So they have different interest groups that became so that joined together, and that's the origin of multi-stakeholder co-ops. We've been doing some research into Aboriginal cooperatives, and they are actually in the registry. They are registered as multi-stakeholder co-ops because they offer both medical and community service service, community services. So maybe that's why I don't know yet. And if there are people working with that in this group, I would be really interested to hear from you about that. I don't know if that answered your question, Rowan.
It did. Thank you. It's a sorry, I'll leave it to someone else to talk. I'll shut up.
I'm just going to read out Eddie's question here, which is a very good one, and it's addressed to the whole panel. So Rowan or Catherine, you might like to tackle this one. And I think it's a great question. Australia is a very competitive country, and the notion of shared ownership, shared benefit and shared risk is hard to sell when people feel that maybe they can do better competing if they win than cooperating. And how do you think we can tackle the issue?
Yes. I won't jump in there. Yeah, I think that's actually key. And as Matt said, I mean, 61% of Australian business is private. It's sole traders. And the thing about sole traders, and even in the course that we're teaching at the moment, we've got a couple of sole traders. And the idea is that, you know, working together is much, much harder than doing it by yourself. Yeah? If you can do it by yourself, and you've only got yourself to blame, and it's much easier that way. But I guess the thing is that it's different. It's a different conversation doing it in community and doing it with community, and rather than doing it on your own. And perhaps that's what we've learned. Maybe that's what we've learned in the COVID time, that we actually need each other, that we can't do this on our own, that we do need to find ways to build community, find ways to participate with each other in a way that, you know, is bigger picture than just the dollar sign, and has more. It has a deeper value. I think legacy work and people doing work because it has good meaning is, I think it's a really powerful. I think it's a powerful agenda. I think maybe hopefully people are paying more attention to the idea that if we want things to be different, we're going to have to do this together. Yeah, 61% of business in Australia being sole traders means that they don't have a union. They don't have power or clout by themselves. Yeah, they maybe got some financial clout, but only as much as they own unto themselves. Yet, I mean, if we started building cooperatives with, you know, with a good size, I mean, this Cooperative Life in Sydney, she's getting some really serious membership in there now, and the work that's happening there in the care industry, and I mean, and this is the thing, yeah, care industry. If we've got actual cooperatives in there doing the work, then it's a different story than corporations, because corporations can't care. Yeah, and corporations really shouldn't be doing care work. Cooperatives doing care work is really powerful, because then the actual work that the carers are doing is defined by the carers themselves. It's not built by, you know, I mean, the ABC childcare showed us what happens when you reduce childcare to the apple slice, yeah, which is a corporate objective, is reduce your costs. Yeah, you can't do childcare by the apple slice. You're going to meet the children in the room. Yeah, and maybe that's what we're learning. Hopefully we can do it differently. And does that probably doesn't even, I don't know how to handle it. I don't know how to tackle it. That's what my work is, how to tackle this.
I just had a thought just to tack on to the end of what Catherine was saying there, and I think my thought bubble's gone now. I might have to come back to it. What was it? It just segued from what you said. I can't remember what it was. That it used to be I know what it was. It was about care co-ops. What's really interesting, and I think this goes directly to what Eddie was asking there, was that care work's a great example, because the private sector, we know it doesn't work well when they're in that sector, but in care work, the philanthropic sector, particularly this has been under the NDIS, where they originally thought there was a whole lot of opportunity. They've found that the model doesn't work particularly well for them. So there is a space there, and this is often what happens. So co-ops are a problem-solving model, And when the gap comes, it's sort of organic that they come in and fill it. And I think the cooperative life is a great example. So there are spaces where neither the profit sector or the philanthropic sector are all that attracted. For various reasons, the model doesn't suit them. So there's a gap. So
yeah,
the solution is
and the key is that the workers themselves, if you're actually really good at care work and you want to do care work, because that's kind of how you'd like to earn your living and pay your rent, then you're actually committed to the work, to the care work, and to have the actual freedom to deliver the care to the level you want to care at. Not being told, no, you can't spend more than 5 minutes doing that job because that's all the time you're allotted. No, that's not how this works. Yeah, I think the care sector is huge, and I'd love to participate with Ethica and building more people's mindset around that. Yeah, and even assisting. I know the councils are being shifted away from delivering aged care and disability care in the homes, and helping councils, helping the workers who've been working for council all these years, helping them set up cooperatives. I think is definitely part of the next chapter as well.
I think Scotty had a question.
Yeah, g'day, how are you? So we're building a multi-stakeholder farming co-op here in Canberra as well. So we've got a couple of things that we're still a bit unsure of. So we're trying to implement Joel Salatin's enterprise stacking model in ours. So we'll have enterprises which are reasonably autonomous, but they're all working together to form a broader system of both ecological ecosystem and business ecosystem. But who does the insurance here? So how are your farmers insured? Do they insure themselves as farmers who are members of the co-op, or does the co-op manage to get worker insurance or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think actually
the
co-op do the. I think the co-op does insure the farmers because they work with equipment and so on. So I do think that they are responsible for that. Yeah, definitely. There has been a review of OH&S and so on undertaken in the operations that they are doing. So that is something they had to do as part of the food next door kind of management, so to speak. Yeah, but I don't know. I can't say exactly how that works out. But yeah, why don't you make contact directly and ask as well?
I do know a little bit about this because, as I understand it, cooperatives actually are still a separate legal entities, so they can undertake joining contracts such that they can get contracts from insurers and insure their staff. I mean, a lot of business has changed over time. So my background is with, for many years I worked while I was a union member, by the way, but anyway, in public service, in the ATO, but looking at businesses, asking them a lot of questions, trying to understand what was happening. And what you find is some of the people who were working for larger companies were being forced to pretend that they were they're forced to pretend they'd incorporated and had a separate business, and suddenly their wife was a director. But the point of mentioning this is that they wanted to be employees, but they were forced to be more independent. And it was just design. It was just a design thing to avoid workers' compensation. But why I'm mentioning this is because insurers came back and said, no, these people are really working for you still, because they were just turning up and saying, oh no, I'm a separate entity. I've got a company. But because it was all a fib, but the insurers came back and said, no, you still have to pay this workers' compensation insurance. And that's fascinating because now a lot of businesses who are sole traders can get insurance for their fellow sole traders, because none of them are employees who work with them all the time. So oddly enough, parts of the rest of business, that is to say the insurance industry, is accommodating some of the things, the real structures that are happening. And anyway, without raving on too much, also I'd note, look, business, the majority, only 1% of business are the large corporates. Let's not get our head stuck in this idea that the large corporates are out to get us. We, that is, most people who are in business, are not the large entities. Small proprietary.
We may not, yeah.
So
we may not be the large, but yeah, we do. They do carry a lot of power.
Yeah, they've got more access to capital. But when you consider that it's 99%, most the small to medium businesses, that's employing 19 people or less. There's ABS figures on this, but I'm just saying we've got this enormous inertia about our thinking about, oh no, the corporations can do all these terrible things. I mean, I spent most of my 14 years of my life trying to stop corporations doing naughty things, but the point is that they are not the dominant feature of our business world. They're not. And the good thing about this is that the power we have in terms of individuals thinking, hey, I don't want to do this. Oh, and I don't have to, because in fact, I'm not part of that structure. Right?
Yeah. Thank you, Matt.
Over 2/3 of the people are actually not employed by large corporations. But they're less than. Anyway,
I think, Matt, I just wanted to, I've written about it in the chat. There's a co-op model in Australia that's very successful and that nobody knows about. And it's called the kind of enterprise co-op or service co-op.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite widely operational in many places. We here in the Hunter, we have the HunterNet co-op. And we have Rapid Clean Co-op. We talked about that before. These are kind of service co-op that actually support many small businesses. And they are incredibly successful, yet they don't even they don't even mention that they are co-ops, but they really are. And they are actually quite genuine co-ops. Rapid Clean is a supplier and service co-op for many small sole traders in the cleaning business, and they supply them with, detergents and soap and so on, but they also help with administration, bulk buying, billing and kind of admin stuff that is really that demands a lot of resources for sole traders. Similarly with HunterNet Co-op here in the Hunter, it's around 250 small manufacturing businesses that they service with education and training and help with cooperation they kind of try to mix or match small businesses together so that they can tender together for bigger contracts. It's a fantastic model.
Almost every agricultural co-op will be an enterprise co-op.
Similar, yes, exactly. But there are these other ones, these service co-ops that we don't know about, but they are highly successful and have been around for years. HunterNet is 30 years old. And it was established when the BHP went down in Newcastle. And they've survived all this time. And they're super successful. So I think we just need to kind of also see what's right under our noses. But Australia has this thing about not calling them co-ops, but they are.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing. We're all trying to shift is this conversation around cooperatives and make them more, what is the barrier? What is the resistance to them?
But Eddie, you have a question here in the chat. Do you want to say it, Eddie?
I think we spoke to this already.
Yeah,
it was John.
Spoken to it already. But if anyone else wants to tackle it, it's just
please. Yeah. Rowan, do you have a go at that one?
The interesting. So I'll bring it back to food next door because we've been doing some work in the Wimmera, and we've been looking at migration, and it's really interesting that there isn't. One of the questions we've been asking about is employee ownership and also cooperative ownership and community ownership of assets. And so there's various models that exist in the area. So they've got a very successful Bendigo Bank community branch in Rupunyup that's doing great work. It's financed a project to build houses for, start with one, but build houses for migrants. It's rebuilt the retail precinct. So it's that model of revenue sharing with your local community, so that the revenues is generated by the business that then's put back into the local community is alive and well in that model. But the visibility of that model in the region, that this is actually happening, that there is this kind of community wealth building happening, isn't there. So we're talking to these other people in that are in the region. They kind of look at the model, but they don't kind of recognise it as being, oh, that's what that is. That's that's community wealth building. And so in terms of talking to people about, so another example is in addressing the housing needs. So the way that like any other immigrants to Australia, that one of the first things that people have tended to do, migrants have tended to do, is to want to buy a house. They buy a car, then they buy a house is the kind of the way it's expressed. And so there's a very large Karen population in Nil that around about 200 people now that grew out of a business called Loverduck, which needed a workforce basically. So anyway, so through that work, the Karen who are very familiar with cooperative structures or working cooperatively, they wouldn't be able to individually buy a house, so they'd progressively, a group of them would come together and they'd pool their money and they'd buy, deposit for one house, and then they've been moving on gradually, collecting houses, so to speak. So that model is kind of alive and well. And then, but what I was trying to get to here is there's a cultural thing that kind of doesn't put this community ownership up front. It seems like owning your own house is the end result. So another example was Australian wildflowers. There was some Karen farmers that so the owner of this is really insightful lady, and she there was one of their farmers who was selling them product, was selling their farm, and she said, "You guys should buy this farm." And they're workers, and they pulled their money together, and they were 40 grand short or something. So she said, "Look, I'll lend you the money." And within 7 months, they had paid it back. They were selling their product to Australian wildflowers, and great story. But again, it's it's driven, it's driven by this private ownership. And I think, so bringing this conversation together, I think there's a cultural difference in Australia than somewhere like Spain, Mondragon, where there's just this kind of visibility and thinking process about cooperatives and working collectively, where we just don't have that in the Australian context. It's just not front and centre for one reason or another. And I think it's we might be seeing a renaissance of it, but certainly it's kind of a very different kind of context. Talking to our friends, and Mondragon have spoken about how when they've taken their model offshore, their factories and industry offshore aren't worker cooperatives. And that's not because they don't want them to be worker cooperatives. It's because the workers don't want that. They kind of view it as being, that's foreign. That's not something we need. We're happy to be employed. So that's kind of another example of those cultural. Maybe it takes time for those cultural things to change. There's a rant.
Can I just again jump in on the back of that rant and just to connect with something that Cecil and I both, in sort of almost separate ways through our research, are both connected up with, and which is about culture and about deep culture, and me through the lens of property law, and Cecil through the work she's doing on the history of housing co-ops. And that is that Australia is a settler colony, and there's so much of that has shaped our history with this sort of rugged individualist approach. And when you think about Europe and even the UK and Europe, it had a long, deep history of commons-based ownership, so collective ownership ran right through the feudal system. So even when they changed their system, the remnants of that collective ownership and management of property the commons still exist, for example, in Norway, in Scotland, and places like that. Those remnants are still there. The cultures in those places are not so far away from those types of property systems that they're in their collective memory. And yet the colonized Australia, when you think about this, you know, they sent people out here who are largely poor, and their chance of owning land in their own countries was pretty low, and they come to Australia and they've been offered, you know, to take over Indigenous land and enclose it. So they took over the commons. But our white colonized history began with enclosure. That's where it started, with the idea of private property and private property boundaries. And I think it's really interesting to think about that. And we're not that old. This is, you know, this is not going, well, I shouldn't say we're not old. Australia is very, very old, but the white settler colony that came in and enclosed the commons is not very old. But those cultural differences are really interesting.
I wonder, Anne, if that actually, I mean, that gives me a bit of hope, because I think there's a lot of Australians who really respect Indigenous wisdom, yeah, and who want to recognise the wisdom of the people who've lived on this land for 90,000 plus years. And maybe we can utilise that caretaker, that custodian understanding, and recognise it is through community. It is through shared work, through shared capacity, that we actually build deeper relationships with this earth and this beautiful land that we're with, and how we can build the future together with Indigenous wisdom centred. And perhaps, I mean, learning cooperative techniques and from I don't know if anyone else in the room's read Sand Talk, but nearly done. And Tyson Yakapura's work, I mean, there's some pretty amazing understanding. Yeah, thanks, Laura. There that lives in that, and there's a massive amount of wisdom to gain from that. And I think we can find our next chapters in deeper conscious shifting of that colonial, that fact that we, you know, there's even this ownership consciousness, like this idea that we can own, that you can own land, that you can own each other. But yeah, those places, I think we can change those things.
Oh, I think so too. I'm not pessimistic about it. I just think that because I'm a lawyer and I'm trying to understand the legal system, which was dropped. You know, we received that legal system whole as bolus from the UK, and we're still accommodating it in a sense. But it is changing and it is evolving, just as we are as a people culturally. And we've had huge amounts of migration since then, and much more diverse. We're much more diverse culturally. So there's a whole lot of reasons why that, you know, we're not fixed in that way. We don't go back as a white settler colony. We don't go back very far, but already you can see that going back to my parents' generation and their parents' generation, they were still very connected to the empire, essentially. And I'm old enough to remember the Queen, you know, in photos on the wall when I was a young kid at school. But our kids don't feel that connection's completely dissipated. Thank heavens, I must say.
Yeah, I remember being sat down in front of the Queen's speech every year, and that doesn't happen anymore. Thanks very much. Yeah. There was a question from John Shield, maybe. I don't know if you still wanted to have that one. And then I think we're about done.
There was one about there's only 16 out of 1,700 co-ops that were worker co-ops.
Yeah, that slide I had up. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I guess as we've just been illustrating, like essentially the notion of the worker-owned cooperative is really foreign. Like we don't see it on Neighbours. I had an entire Bachelor of Business in entrepreneurship, and the word worker-owned cooperative wasn't whispered. Like no one got anywhere near that idea. So if entrepreneurs can't consider like worker-owned cooperative as a business model, then I think, if our universities don't have this conversation, I'm glad to see that we have got university level that Anne and Cecile deliver in what university, sorry, again? In Newcastle? your delivery of your
Yeah,
cooperative
University of Newcastle. We delivered we had a
Mm-hmm.
graduate certificate program for 4 years, but they dismantled it this year.
Oh no.
Yeah,
As they do with
we're
anything
still
good.
recovering.
Oh, it's sad.
But Catherine, can I ask then if
Please.
you know, if a worker's producing products or services, why are you calling it like a worker co-op and not so a producer or you know, some other type of co-op?
I guess we've used work cooperatives in context to say a factory floor. Yeah, if an entire factory and a factory floor is all owned by the people who work it, that's what the worker cooperative is, which is different, I guess, than the producer cooperative that's out on land. I don't know if it's that much different. I'm not quite sure why we've drawn those particular lines in the sand of language, but yeah, perhaps it's yeah, it seems to be the definition thereof of the worker-owned cooperative, and I'm yeah, it's not the same. I guess the dairy cooperative, yeah, producer cooperatives tend to be, maybe it's a different relationship. I'm not quite sure why the legal difference.
I'm a member of the Earthworker Co-op, and I was for a long time ago. But I just thought of them as another, you know, product type, or you know, co-op.
Yeah, I guess
you provide your work, so it's a labor. You provide your labor, so to speak. Yeah. So and that's different to when you provide a product. So that would change your relationship, I think.
Yeah. So,
Because
and I guess it's where it's where labour owns the capital rather than capital owning the labour, and the means of production, the actual capacity for production, is owned by the people who do the work, and which is different than the extractive nature of corporations or any other employee relationship. I mean, you've got 4 people on the ground who are all doing selling, and your business is to supply that content, and those guys, you know, they do their sales job, and they've got their sales job, but they don't earn anywhere near as much as money that's being made by that organisation. Even just 4 sales guys can make a massive amount of money for someone else, but they don't make it for themselves. Yeah.
So I guess there's the employee-owned associations and all that as well. So there's a fine line, I think, between. Yeah,
I guess there are legal definitions all the way through, yeah, and the lines in the sands of language. I think we're about done for 3:30 as well.
We are.
It's been really great.
Yeah, it's been lovely, and there's a question there from Eddie. I'm not sure that I haven't sort of done any research there. She's asking, does the role of church historically in Europe, has it impacted? And I think it's a really, an interesting question. I don't know enough to answer it, but sorry, Eddie. We've all got different times here. She's in Adelaide. My understanding is I know the Catholic Church had a lot to do with the credit union movement in some countries. So in Canada, it did. And in other countries, including Australia, I think the Catholic Church was quite involved in the credit union movement. But it's interesting because in the UK, which was sort of, you know, also a hub of co-op development, there was a very strong Protestant ethic and link to the cooperative movement. But I'm sure that, you know, there were advantages for religion in seeing cooperative movements flourish because there were a mechanism of wealth.
And community, mechanisms of community, which they were invested in as well.
The social cooperatives in Italy, which kind of where it started, was very much driven by church kind of social what should I say, social focus or social objectives. So I think they had a good had a big impact in that sense, and they were by social justice in many ways. So
thank you for that, Scotty. I've just looked that up. That's great. I have a read.
Okay. I guess we could have
Thanks
a
for
break.
having me.
We should have a break.
Yes, my slides are in. I think I put my link to the slides at the very top. But if you can reach me at Earthworker if you want to get any further. I'd love to see some members if you'd like to come and join us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and great to see you, Rowan, and great to meet you.
Yeah. Lovely to meet you too, Catherine, and thanks so much, Rowan. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
everybody.
That's been great.
Thanks for
And go
having
and visit Food Next Door website. It's quite nice to study them and their testers.
Yeah,
Okay.
I cracked the open. I have a look. Thank you. Bye.
See you
Bye.
later. Bye.